Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming. My name is Killjoy, and today we're talking about The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, the most recently released Zelda game in that franchise. And I gotta say, this is a very cute, very cozy take on Zelda. Obviously, if you didn't know, the biggest difference here is that you're playing as Zelda herself rather than Link. And because of that, Nintendo have used this opportunity to have a very different playstyle than what you would have if you were playing as Link. So, this game is more of a puzzle-focused Zelda. It's more based on using and trying to complete things in the world by using what is known as echoes. And echoes is the big mechanic of this game that the game revolves around and gets you to think about when you are dealing with combat, when you are dealing with puzzles and everything else in between. So, the game itself, let's start with just how it looks and then we'll get on to mechanics afterwards. The game is using the same engine as the Link's Awakening remake. It's a nice art style, it's very toy-like, it's probably the best way to describe it, like little people in this big world. It works, it does the job for what it's trying to go for with your deserts and your forest areas and your wetlands and all these different things, how Hyrule's always split up into multiple areas. The game looks decent, to be honest, and it's very pleasant to look at the time, and the way that they've done it. And every time you go to, like, if you go to swimming in the Zora lands, or if you do go to Gerudo Desert, you get that vibe, you get that feel from it. And the map itself isn't massive. It feels kind of compact, but it feels compact in all the right ways, so that you getting from place to place is fairly easy. There's waypoints now that you can jump to, but it feels like a big 2D Zelda, but nothing like a big 3D Zelda, which is a good thing. Like, it feels everything's easy to get to, and that's really cool. So the world and how the world looks is very well married together. That's the best way to say it, is the look and the feel of the world. It works well together, and you never feel like you are going, oh boy, that's a long way away. There is a horse that you can get in this game, so there is that opportunity to grab that and then bolt around a lot faster. So for those things, I'm very happy with. I think they work really well together. But the game's main mechanic, there's two main mechanics in this game. There's the creating the echoes of objects and enemies you find in the world, and then there's using Try to be able to grab things. So we'll start with the echoes, because I think that's the thing that's most interesting, is that as you progress, you create echoes of lots of things. Beds, pots, teddy bears, plants, just for like objects. So you have your tables, trampolines. So you have your object side of it, then you have your enemies. So you have your Redeads and your Moblins and your Keese and all the classic Zelda enemies that you're used to seeing. You can create echoes of them. And the reason why this is such an interesting mechanic is it kind of borrows that philosophy from Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, where you can approach a puzzle, where you can approach a combat challenge using whatever you think's best. So if you want to do a combat challenge where you flood the battlefield with lots of cheap enemies to spawn, lots of Keese, maybe for example, they'll fly around, attack lots of stuff, you can do that. If you're like, actually I want to spawn one larger enemy, I can spawn in a Dark Nut maybe. Or you might forego that and be like, actually I got these tornado guys and they're really good at knocking people off walls into pits, things like that, and you spawn them and they fly around and they knock people over. The game's constantly giving you that choice of, hey, here's what we're putting in front of you, how do you want to handle it? Now in some cases with puzzles it might be like, oh, you need fire, so you need to use something that's going to create fire, or you might need electric. There are those types of things where you're like, oh, it's very obvious what you need. But then there are other puzzles and challenges where you just kind of pick what you think is best. Like when later on in the game you get a water block, you can build the water blocks, you can stack them up, and you can climb up and down quite easily with them. You might want to just use beds, you might want to use trampolines, sorry. You then get like floating platforms, you get a mixture of things that you can use as the player to get around, and the biggest challenge in this game is your own mind. How do you understand what's in front of you? How do you look at your inventory of echoes and go, hey, what works here? What allows me to complete this in a way that makes sense to me? And that alone that makes this game fascinating, because you can come across boss fights, you can come across challenges, and how you might do it is very different to somebody else. Like I've said about Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, where they have that very schoolboy mentality kind of thing, where you go to the school and you go, oh, I fought this thing and that's how I did it, and someone else does it very differently. That can also apply to Echoes of Wisdom, where you can do something and talk to someone else or watch somebody else and they'll do it in a completely different way. And that alone is just such a freeing experience in the game, and I really love that Nintendo have managed to capture that philosophy of game ideal and put it into a 2D Zelda game. Because if it's not obvious, in the past I've always mentioned that 2D Zelda games have always been my preferred Zelda games. I don't know what it is, I just get on with them better, except for Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, where I genuinely had a great time. But overall, I've always liked the fact that this is based on Link's Awakening, Links to the Past, Oracle Season, Ages, all that stuff, having that kind of flavour to it. There's a simplicity to these top-down Zelda games that you just don't get from the 3D ones that I really appreciate. So the Echo mechanic, great on its own, fantastic idea. When you marry that with Try's ability, which is essentially like a catch and release ability, so you can tag him onto an object which links you as the character with the object. Now if it's a giant rock and you're playing as Zelda and you jump, that giant rock jumps with you. So you can move like objects around in the environment and it's all good. But when you start incorporating stuff like that into combat, when you start using your echoes of monsters, you can do all kinds of crazy things. You can have somebody with a shield in front of you, you can pick them up and walk around and they can block all the things, allow them to attack but defend you. You can pick them up and move them around while they're doing their attack and hit as many things as possible. There's so many combinations of being able to like pick things up and move them back and forth. Like you can use the catch and release mechanic and then have it so that when you're attached to something, you then move along with that. So if you've got like a bird or something, you latch onto it or aim onto it, grab it and let the bird do the thing. It's mental. There's so many things that like I'm just like, oh, that's one way of tackling it. Oh, I can use this, I can use that. Like it's such a cool idea. And the game, at this point in the game, I've done about 4 or 5 dungeons, I can't remember the exact amount, and I found a lot of echoes, and I try to mix up how I play with these things, like trying to figure out combat, trying to do that stuff, but I'm sure there are things I haven't even thought about when I've been doing it, so that's really cool. It makes the boss fights very interesting. Like, I think that's the biggest thing, is with the boss fights basically being a case of you do have the ability in this game for a limited amount of time to go into a sword fighter mode, which is a very powerful mode, but when it comes to the boss fights, you can't rely on that without like getting like orbs that charge that back up. So you have to think about, do I need to stun the boss by putting something in its way? Do I need to use maybe a group of moblins to like wail on this thing? Seeing what I've done, I cannot wait to look at what other people have done to fight bosses and things like that, because ultimately that's what makes this so interesting, is that how do people approach that? How do people approach that combat challenge? How do people approach the puzzles that are in front of them? There are puzzles in, like a lot of puzzles I've come across I just can't get my head around, and I know I'm missing something, but you know, it's just one of those things. Like, I will figure it out eventually. But yeah, the grab mechanic works really well mixed in with the echoes mechanic, and you can do some cool puzzling, you can do some cool combat stuff. So overall, the game's main focus, there is a story here, which is kind of your standard Zelda affair. It's just that Link's gone missing and these rifts are appearing around. But what the game's good at is having you go around to these areas that you know and basically deal with them in a puzzle thing. What's crazy is this is like one of the first Zelda games, if not the first Zelda game, to have a dedicated jump button, which is weird. But that also helps, you know, with the movement in this game and getting around and doing things and not being locked to the usual conventions. Like, it's not strayed too far away from a typical Zelda, because you still have your dungeons in this, you have your boss key and your keys, and you have to like do it. And I think the dungeons itself are kind of, these are some of the more they're more up my street, because I've never been a big fan of this find the one item, that one item is how you defeat the boss, you know, kind of dungeons like classic Zelda is. This is, you need to just figure out how to open that boss door and fight the boss. There's no, you know, particular, like, the item's not acting as the key. It's, the dungeon will have everything you need in it in terms of, hey, we've got enemy types you can use, all this sort of stuff. Get the echoes of that, use them to figure it out, then get to the boss and get out, basically, so to try to fix these rifts. And because of that, it just feels a lot. Everything works together really well. It's one of those games where the mechanics that you have at your disposal, and because you're never locked out of anything particularly, you don't have to go and find one particular thing. You just need something that you see something that does fire, something that does electric. You can make it all work as you want it. So that whole thing, the game world, the game mechanics, the way the games play is all really good. It's a really, really well put together Zelda game. There are a few downsides, and we need to talk about them because it's odd when Nintendo puts out a product that doesn't run well or stable, and that's very evident here. This game's performance is constantly flipping between 30 frames, 60 frames. This is a game that should have been locked at 30 frames, I feel, or you should have made the indoor parts 60 and the outdoor parts 30, because it's very obvious that keeps happening. And yeah, I give a lot of crap to a lot of other games for not having the best performance. I can't really give this one a pass. As much as I'm having a good time with this game, it is obvious when the game's running better than other times when it's not running so well, and having a shift in essentially having a shift in the frame rate can eat your inputs, and that's never good. I don't like people that kind of just go, yes, it's not great, and bypass it. I think it needs to be very much, said, this game runs odd, and this game does have a tendency to flip between it. As soon as more stuff's on screen, that's when it goes into 30. When you're indoors, it's not as bad, but still, this shouldn't be happening. Like, just lock the game at 30 frames if, consistently. That's not what I would want ideally, but I would rather than that than an inconsistent frame rate. That's never good. That is the biggest problem with the game, to be honest. Married with one other problem, which is the way the echoes work. And you've probably seen this when you get echoes, they all get added to one long list on one screen, and that list gets long very fast. And it is a real pain trying to move along the list, trying to find what you're trying to find to use it. This could have easily been fixed by one change, and that change could have been just, hey, the top row is just objects, the bottom row is just monsters. You could go even further than that, and I think Nintendo will do an update to this game, because I think this is one of the most obvious bits of criticism towards the game overall. And that is that, they could have had it in a drop-down menus. They could have had it. You can do it in the journal, I believe, and it makes it more of a grid-based system, which is fine. But I do think you could have easily split it into objects and also into monsters, and that would have been much better and solved it. It's more just a pain than it is like super awful to the game. It's just an annoyance, right? It's an annoyance that nobody wants to deal with. And kind of the last thing that is a little bit of a bummer with this game is that the game lets you go to places that are moved on by story early. So if you don't go and move the story on and you go to a cave and you're like, well, what's in this cave? There's nothing here. You then have to come back to that later on and deal with it when the game's like, hey, you need to go to these places. Very minor, not much of an issue. Just it could have been avoided by just not letting me go to those places until the game says, hey, I need you to go there. So overall, I think Echoes of Wisdom is a very fun, very solid Zelda game. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about it when I finish it, because I need to finish the game off first. I've got a couple more dungeons left, I think. I'm enjoying the smaller experience. I'm enjoying playing this game as a pick up and play game, and I like that. And I like the smart puzzle designs we've got here. I like the ideas of it. I like the way that Zelda plays. It's fun to play as Zelda. There's some weird hate, like there's always going to that corner of the internet that's like, oh no, we want to play as Link, but Link's always going to come back. The fact that you get to play as Zelda here, and the fact that the game is based around you using your brain rather than just muscling it, is awesome. I think that's really cool, and Nintendo have done a decent job here. But, only buy this game if you can put up with performance dips, because this game has a lot of them, and the performance is kind of bad. I would love to see them patch it so that it is significantly more stable, or giving the players a choice just to run the whole game at 30 frames. I think that would be quite welcome. But overall, I think this is a good Zelda game. It's puzzle heavy. It's one of the better 2D ones. And I think people are going to look fondly on this game in years to come, having that, different gameplay. And that's one thing you can say about Nintendo. Regardless of however you feel about them, at least they try to mix up the games from game to game by adding different mechanics and new mechanics. And I think they've done a really good job here, having a game that's focused around puzzling and less about combat. And it could have gone much further than that, but it's gone to this point that we're at. So overall, enjoying the game. We'll finish the game, and hopefully other people will enjoy it, or at least have a better idea that this game is a good game, just maybe marred down by some performance stuff. So there's my take on The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. So thank you very much for watching this video. As always, if you like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content like this, then hit subscribe. Links for Facebook and Twitter will be down below in the description as always. And until next video, I will see you then.